myself. So I took myself back to school. UW has a really great entrepreneurship business degree program. I went through that and really just went full force. I said, okay, I need a real world example, not just by the books. And so I met with a couple of founders. I paired up with this guy, I'll call him Joel. He had the idea, and I said, okay, well, if you have the idea, I'm going to work the business side. And he was a budding developer, and so I think we can see where that's going. He really liked to build a thing, and I just went along with it. And I said, well, let's do customer discovery. I said, well, no, I think I'm onto something. Let me just keep building. I said, well, let's talk to people, right? And so we clashed on that, and I jumped ship fairly soon after and did my own next two startups, which were not venture-backed. They wanted to be, but they were friends and family and some partnership and sponsor-backed. And those were great experiences. They both failed. I think you do learn a lot from failure. And now I'm a chief of staff at a B2G, B2Government startup out of Tacoma. And hopefully one of my ideas in my back pocket will also one day come to fruition. So that's a little bit me.
Thank you, Angie.
Hi, I'm Chic Hendricks. I don't know how I'm going to make mine short. I started my career in mechanical engineering, very similar to Dr. Jamar over there, back in the late 60s. And I spent 7 years in mechanical engineering, got very, very bored at a drafting table. Back then we didn't have the computers. Does anybody in here remember Wang Laboratories?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Because Wang recruited me, and I went to work for Wang because of my mechanical engineering background. They needed somebody with that experience to work the AEC marketplace, architecture, engineering, construction. And so I went to work for Wang in 1977 and spent a few years there. And while I was there, they said, look, we need somebody to do the legal market. And would you be interested in doing that? And I said, yeah. The AEC market was okay, but I got into the law market, and wow, I just made tons of money. It was a tremendous opportunity. So those are my W-2 stories. Now, move forward a little ways to my first business as an entrepreneur. It was a graphic arts business. It ended up being a sign company that ended up being a number of other things that were artistically induced. I ended up selling it to my employees and moved on into computer software. And I got another recruitment from another software company. And ironically, Ron and I found out that we were working right across the driveway from each other in Los Gatos, California. He was at Eagle Hardware. I was at Personal CAD Systems as the director of sales.
1984.
1984, yeah. And one day, somebody in the office said, oh my gosh, the guy next door just died. His CEO jumped in his Ferrari because they had just gone public, accidentally drove off a cliff or something, just killed himself.
He was on cocaine and champagne.
Whatever it was, yeah, it was just really crazy. But anyway, that was my first venture into software. And then I'm going to just jump really quickly here. I got into commercial finance. A buddy of mine was in finance and said, hey, because of your mechanical engineering and architecture background, how about starting a business with me financing commercial real estate projects? And I said, where are we going to get the money? He said, well, National Bank of Canada going to give it to us. So we started Rainier Group in Bellevue, mid 80s, after I turned down the OEM sales manager job at Microsoft, after interviewing with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. Really smart idea. And anyway, so we started Rainier Group. Well, I'd be a billionaire right now. I wouldn't be up here talking to you. So, but that's okay. Believe me, I have no regrets. The entrepreneurship thing, it is truly the only way to go because it works on your passion. If you're passionate about something, just do it. Anyway, so Rainier Group was a commercial financing arm for National Bank of Canada. We placed loans on shopping centers and apartment projects and so on and so forth. We did that for about 3 years. Went out, got my real estate broker's license, started selling commercial real estate. And so it's kind of another entrepreneurial deal. And like Angie, I didn't raise a lot of money. We just started out doing deals, and the money come in, you could sort of fund everything from that, and which is really the good way to go. Now, in the new days of software, that's kind of hard to do, because if you come up with a good idea and you develop a technology and you're really going at it, you're going to need some funding to really get going. But long story made short, I sort of graduated through commercial real estate. I met a .com, NVST.com. Does anybody remember them? They were around in 97 to 2005, I think. They wanted somebody to run their M&A division. And so because of my corporate finance background at that time, I went to work for them, another W-2 sort of thing, and kept my real estate business kind of going on the side. But the .com era happened in, 2002, 2003, and they unfortunately did one thing wrong. They raised $10 million from a couple of Silicon Valley investors, but they burned through it in about 2.5, 3 years, and the industry was starting to change. They had built a great private equity network on the web, and a lot of people from all over the world were using it. It just could have been a fantastic thing, but they burned through the money, and their investors wouldn't put any more in. So if you're an entrepreneur and you pick an investor to put money into your deal, make sure that you pick one that's going to go the distance with you. And you don't know what the distance is when you're starting out. But that's one mistake that I found was just really a bad one. I mean, $10 million, you'd think it'd be enough to get something like that going. And they did a good job. They had a lot of product, they had a lot of deals going on. I ended up buying their M&A division out of bankruptcy. I told the president of the company, I said, you got to go into bankruptcy to save the thing. And so she filed bankruptcy, Chapter 11. I sold the company, the main company, to a former Microsoft guy who did okay with it. We sold it for about $1 million. And I bought the M&A division out of it and spent the next 20 years doing corporate finance / with a special focus on mergers and acquisitions. And so that's been my business for the last 20 years, 22 years, I think. But other than last year when I started my software business, but let me go back just a few years. My business partner, who was one of the top valuation analysts and a former professor at the University of Washington, Mick Gamache, died of pancreatic cancer, of all things, in 2018 or 2019. So when Mick died, I thought, okay, I'm just going to retire. So I retired. I've got a big house out in the valley that's a B&B, does really well. I didn't need to really work. Yeah, but I got bored. Within a year, I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. Retirement is not what it's kicked up to be. So I thought, geez, what am I going to do? So OpenAI starts introducing this little chatbot thing, GPT. I thought, well, if it's really AI, then, that's going to be cool. So I started messing around with it. I thought, okay, this is going to change the world, period. I knew right off the bat that AI, the way they had introduced it to the marketplace, was going to make some huge changes. I started my software company, Zygos, Xaigos, which ironically is explainable artificial intelligence, generative open source. But the word Zygos comes from, does anybody know? It's a Greek word, Z-Y-G-O-S. Does anybody know what it is? It's the beam that goes across the top of the scales of justice that holds up the two scales. Zygos is that beam. So I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to call it. And then we just decided to spell it X-A-I-G-O-S. So that's the company I started last June, and we decided to go into the legal software end of it. So I went and met with an attorney friend of mine who runs a nice firm here in Bellevue, 60, 65 attorneys. And And I said, this is what we're going to do. What do you think we should do? He said, well, we could use a redaction product. What about something like AI Lawyer? Or what about changing our database to something that's really, so he, right off the bat, spouted off 3 things that we could go into. So we're actually going to go into all 3 of them. So I've got some good guidance from him, and I've got a good team of people put together. It was amazing how fast everything went together. So I incorporated it as a C corporation, and which is probably something you want to consider how you're going to do that. Because C corps, you can sell stock a lot easier than you can an LLC or anything else. So.
Let's pause there because you mentioned 2 things I want to touch on.
Sure.
You mentioned legal structure or entity structure, which may have some war stories around.
Yeah.
You mentioned customer discovery, which Angie had also mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna maybe just go do a quick fire round before we go a little deeper, but I want to just touch on some common threads. So
All right.
Angie mentioned doing some friends and family rounds, but then it was unclear the exits of those, so that might be a cool story.
Yeah.
We had Bob talking about venture-backed companies that you would not have heard of, so presumably something happened there. They're not around. And Chic, you talked about missing out on being a billionaire because of following your dream to be an entrepreneur and having no regrets. No regrets is amazing. So. Let's do a quick fire round and just see if we can identify the area of where the worst things happen. So let's call 3 areas. Let's say funding, team or co-founders, and customers. So let's do a quick fire. Mention one of those 3, team, funding, or customers, as where your biggest war wounds are from.
Oh, I'll go first. Co-founders.
Great, Bob.
Customers.
Customers.
Co-founders.
Co-founders, 2 to 1. Co-founders, 1 customer, and no funding. So it sounds like burning through capital was something you talked about, but that is not the major wound because you weren't actually the one sounding like doing that. So great. Let's start with you, Angie, and talk a little bit about what might have come up with the co-founder. You alluded to this build mentality without collecting customer feedback or doing customer discovery. We've all probably seen that way too many times, but maybe you can elaborate.
Sure. Yeah. So it was literally class number 1, Entrepreneurship 101 class, where the professor was like, it really matters who you pick for your team and your co-founders, and having that co-founder fit is super important. And so I was like, okay, class 1, lesson 1. Let's go find someone I can, partner with and make it important to make this co-founder fit thing work. So we did like trials and not dating, but like dating. Do we work well together? Can we stay in a room and stand each other for, long time periods? And is the idea something that we're both passionate about? Do our skill sets match? And I went through a few people and I found one guy that I thought met all that criteria plus a decent idea. And so not being the engineer type, I was like, well, I'll be the front facing, customer discovery, customers, the business model, the business plan, the structure, finding partnerships, that side of this. And that originally was the plan. But given the fact that I couldn't get my partner to get on board with doing customer discovery interviews. He just wanted to build the thing he thought was a really great idea. And that was really our downfall. And we just kept butting heads on, we've got to talk to customers. He was like, I just want to build the thing and then we can put it in front of customers. How many times have we all heard that? I just want to build the thing and then get in front of people. It's just, you've got to start with what you have. And even if it's just like a keynote, like this clicks through to another page, like you just have to get something in front of them. It doesn't have to be perfect. And in fact, it doesn't even have to exist. That's my takeaway.
Maybe really quick on how high the tensions got with you and your co-founder. Maybe you can paint a picture briefly.
Yeah, it got to the point where he basically said to my face, 2 or 3 times, I will not do customer discovery. I need to just build this thing. Okay. All right.
Yeah, thank you for sharing and being so open. I think co-founder dynamics, it could be like, it's lifelong learning, right? I don't know if there's anyone who's a master. So let's move on to some more customer stuff with Bob. Are customers one of the reasons those companies we may not have heard of, and like what's maybe the worst pain or customer situation you had, and feel free to be really specific.
Sure. Well, and what I hear is the intersection of co-founder and customer challenge, right? Do the customer development, founders are better, maybe there's a chance. So in my experience, the building stuff is the easy part, and actually the funding part is easier too than you think. It's once you have money, can you build a team? Can you build a company? Can you get customers? So the wall, the first hard wall you have to get through is you have to sell something you have to find a customer who will buy your stuff. They have to want to buy it for enough, and they have to be able to move as quickly so that you can participate in the market that you want to participate in. And doing customer discovery is one way to say, hey, if we build this, because Angie's co-founder said, if I build this, they will use it or they'll buy it. And the challenge is just beginning. Even when you do customer discovery correctly, that's still just the beginning. You still have to find a scalable market customer product fit. And my first couple of startups, and I'll be specific. So we had built a product, my very first venture backable company, built effectively TurboTax, but for HIPAA compliance for small, medium-sized physician practices. Back then, 85 to 90% of all physicians practiced in small environments. Now it's exactly the opposite. But back then, they didn't have legal departments and compliance officers and things like that, but they had to comply with this new HIPAA thing. What is that? And so we saw another customer that we had for this previous services-based business struggled with that, asked us if we could help. We said, well, yeah, you're not compliant, but here's what you should have to do. And then so we ran the numbers on that to see, is there really a market for a tool that would help all those other physician practices do that? And the answer was yes. And so we built this tool called HIPAA Checkup. And we were the best product in the market. We had an 80% close rate on in-person demos. I would travel around to cities far and wide and do presentations at healthcare conferences and state association meetings and things like that. It was terrific. We were very excited about it. And then if the regulatory environment at the time was not what we had hoped. Administration had come in and said, regulation, not so much. And so that administration had a budget for HIPAA compliance. Nationwide HIPAA compliance was $2 million a year for enforcement of this new regulation. And and if you don't know what it costs to enforce a national regulation like that, you might not recognize that is approximately zero. That's enough to open an office on K Street, basically. And so they actively did not enforce, and they issued very confusing and conflicting advice to physicians, like, you probably don't have to comply, there's exceptions, don't worry about it. This was coming from Department of Health and Human Services and other organizations that were responsible for educating and enforcing HIPAA in the healthcare industry. So we showed up in the market with a product that our customers needed and wanted and would pay for, but this regulatory environment that was controlled by an organization, a bigger organization than us, and they didn't care about us, and they weren't worried about our success. They had other ideas about what was important, and so what that did was it blocked us from our customers. So we showed up in a market where we had a customer, and then that customer went away because of this other bigger thing, this big thing called the United States government, right? So that federal regulation went unenforced, and we ran out of time. And I will say, a lot of startups talk about running out of money, but mostly you don't run out of money. that's really actually kind of rare to run out of money. You run out of time. You raise money and you say, we're going to do this, we're going to get to that strategic milestone in that amount of time, then we're going to raise money again. And then you run out of money, or so it appears, but you didn't really run out of money. You just didn't get to the milestone you needed to in time. And so one of the lessons I began to learn there was, we were in a market before this sort of the troubling stuff from the regulators happened. We probably had a good year where we could have probably grown really, really rapidly into that market, but we didn't for lots of reasons. And so in retrospect, it's easier to look back and say, yeah, that really big entity that didn't care about us, that's why we couldn't continue to sell our product like we needed to. But it really was also about time. Like, we had an open window that we didn't capitalize because we were not as sensitive to time as we should have been. And then that carried through. So that company transitioned. We had to shut that company down. We learned a lot about HIPAA. We ended up acquiring a company in California that had developed a payment transaction for healthcare payments, which at the time was $6 or $7 trillion. And they had a partnership with Visa to launch that platform into Visa. They struggled for a couple of years to do that. They couldn't get it done. They came to us and said, hey, you know a lot about software and healthcare and HIPAA. Will you be effectively our outsourced software development firm to create this? So we didn't want to be a services company. So we turned it around and said, well, how much would it cost just for us to acquire your company? And it's a fun story. I won't take the time for it right now, but the upshot of that was they sold it to us for $1 million. And so we went and raised the $1 million, bought the company, and had to now assign the contract they had with Visa, another big 800-pound gorilla company. And they were happy about the acquisition. They liked us. They thought we had better ideas about how we would do this. We had to get we were raising from some investors in Seattle, some of you would probably recognize. And Visa had this habit internally. They would call every one of these kinds of partnerships a pilot. That was just their nomenclature. Even though they had pilots that were producing hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for them and had been pilots for a decade. So you were telling investors, hey, we're waiting for the LOI from Visa's legal department, but they're working with us. We're doing planning, right? Not negotiation. We're actually planning with their team about how to integrate the technology and whatnot. But we always had to say what they would say, which was a pilot, and they wouldn't let us say anything different. So we had to tell these investors, we're doing a pilot. Like, oh, so it's not solid yet. Like they're gonna kick the tires, and maybe it'll work, and maybe it won't. And after 14 months of waiting for an LOI, legal department at Visa, can you imagine trying to get an LOI? Two guys in a garage trying to get an LOI from the legal department at Visa. And so all that time went by. They had no sense of urgency. They thought they were doing the right. They didn't even know they were crushing us. They just thought, oh, we're really excited. Yeah, the legal department's working on it. We'll get it to you when we can. And that time, it got to the point where we knew we had to figure a different way to make progress. So we actually hired a CEO who had sold a company to Visa, worked there at Visa in an earn-out, left the company, bought that technology back from Visa, worked on it for a few years, and then sold it back to Visa again. Like, if we could get that person as a CEO, certainly we can navigate this stuff, right?
So, Bob.
Yes.
Sorry, my
You asked for detail.
I lost my mic, probably because of batteries.
You just want to cut me off?
I may borrow yours. No, I'm going to summarize because I think this last point was super interesting. Bob mentioned a lot about time. You found a way to accelerate the timetable, so you didn't run out of money. You also had this situation where you realized maybe picking a market matters too, right? Customer concentration sounds like it was a theme that was potentially an issue.
If I could,
Yeah, please.
just to set the record straight. 800-pound gorillas sound awesome. Startups want to work with them. They want to do big deals with big companies because it's sexy. Investors love it. It means they're going to be big. And until you have some equity at that table with that big partner, be careful. Mostly it doesn't go well. 800-pound gorillas crush startups, and I see it all the time. And yeah, so that's actually the message I want you guys all to get.
Thank you, Bob. Great takeaways. You can go to Chic here because we're gonna get your. Well, actually, we'll do a quick rapid fire round in between here. We talked maybe at your darkest. We haven't got to the real dark. Maybe like the deepest, like the most painful times. Maybe Chic, you'll cover this. But who was your support person during that time? Just name one. Doesn't have to be their name, but maybe like the type of person it was who supported you through the most painful times in your startup. All of you, just maybe quick fire.
Oh. Gosh.
This is my last co-founder, Joe.
Your last co-founder. So you had a good co-founder.
I felt like I swung one way with the first experience and swung. I like it was perfect with my last co-founder, and so we were just each other's best friend and support system.
I love to hear it. So there's some optimism here for that. It's not co-founders aren't always bad; they can be good.
You have to get burned first so that you learn what you don't want.
Or order of operations, yeah. Bob, do you have one as well? Who supported you?
My best investor.
Oh, that's great too. Investors are also not all bad. Can support you.
Yeah.
What do you got, Chic?
My checkbook supported me.
Your checkbook.
Yeah, as far as the funding, my co-founder's story, similar to Angie's, is a guy I've known for 12 years, former Microsoft guy, wrote all the Microsoft ATM software years ago for Microsoft. Retired at the age of 40. He retired way too early. He and I had been looking at opportunities, because of my M&A background, I was always finding deals. And so we looked for about 12 years for different deals to get involved in. We did some consulting for a few. So I finally got him into this new software company. Well, not finally. When I mentioned it to him, he said, yeah, absolutely. With the AI, let's go for it. Now, he'd been messing around with crypto and doing some consulting on crypto for several years. So he got involved with me fairly early on. We got along okay. We had a few disagreements about how things ought to go, but we pretty much agreed on getting customers, which we started right out with a customer. I mean, it was a great deal with this law firm. But he and his longtime girlfriend of like 30 years broke up last September, and he just turned into a beast. He went off the rails. And I thought, oh my God, who am I dealing with here? I mean, it was night and day. So he just turned into a psycho, and it was really too bad. I mean, he's calmed down now, but he just started giving me a lot of crap about different things and talking to the development team. I was lucky enough I don't believe in luck, fortunate enough to run into some master's grads from Seattle U who all graduated last year. 3 of them together had been through the master's program. Anytime you can find developers that have worked together for that many years and they've got master's degrees in computer science, software development from a good school, I was so lucky to get 3 of them all at once. And they've just been great. They all work together, they collaborate really well, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so he was just really adamant about who should talk to the developers and who shouldn't, and he just got really weird. So I just basically fired him in December.
Oh,
and that was
wow.
tough. That was really tough to do. Tough. A guy I've known for 12 years.
So maybe let's for time's sake, we got another couple minutes here. Let's try and summarize some takeaways. So we are in here. We always improvise when we're in the startup space. So what a takeaway here, maybe could you have learned this sooner? I know you knew this person for 12 years, had a lot of history. Would have firing faster helped? Or is there some other takeaway you can share?
Would what help?
Firing your co-founder faster because it was such a toxic situation? Or was there like a relationship history that made that hard to do? Maybe, do you have any advice around having friends as co-founders?
Well, the relationship history of 12 years was really weighing heavy on me, and I thought, okay, they had split up. He and his girlfriend split up in September. I fired him in December, so what is that, 3.5 months later, and it got worse. So at first it was one thing, and I thought, okay, I'm going to let this go, and just not make a big deal out of it, and then something else happened, and let that one go, and then it just got really ugly. And I talked to friends, mentors, people in my church that I know, and got a lot of good advice. And it's always important as a founder to get good advice. You may not always take it, but you'll hear the opinions of others who you trust, and that's really a key. And I just finally did it one day, and I terminated his employment. He was not happy about it, and he said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Look, it's a C corporation. I'm the CEO, and you're done. And the CEO can do that."
Thank you, Chic. We're going to do just 2 rapid-fire questions over here with Bob and Angie. And maybe, like with founders, we're always problem and solution pairing. So maybe you can mention one, like, if you haven't already talked about it or something you already talked about, what was that really painful thing? What was that problem? And then what was the solution you discovered, and that might help someone else?
I think I'd like to point out that a big problem that you can have with your co-founder is alignment on what actually you're doing. Alignment on the problem, alignment on the customer, alignment on the path forward. And I found that can be really uncomfortable and really stressful. And if you don't have the right words to find that alignment, again, it doesn't really get resolved, and it just keeps getting worse. So in my last startup, which was a mental health app, we really prioritized, Joe and I, communication. So if we felt like something we weren't really like agreeing, we literally, like, it was like a therapy session. We stopped and we were like, okay, hypothesis hats are on. Like, everything that we're hearing each other say are just hypotheses. We still need to test and talk to people and find out the real thing and move forward. And so we had this hypothesis hat kind of mentality, as well as, hey, we're out of alignment. How can we like fix this right now? So we had like, not the unicorn, but like a safety word of like, hey, shit's going bad. We need to talk about it, figure it out. Where are we out of alignment? And until we both felt like we were clear on that problem's path forward and what it actually was, then we could go much faster and be friends the whole way through. But we prioritized being kind and always in alignment and recognizing really quickly when we weren't. So co-founder fit is important, but also being very upfront in like this almost like couples therapy way of recognizing when you're not in agreement and fixing it really fast.
I think that's great. Thanks, Angie. And speaking of fast, Bob, let's see how fast you can be.
What she said, that's brilliant. You all should do what Angie just said. I'll be super unhelpful and outlandish. 4 startups, I've mentored, advised 300 founders and founders of startups. Uncertainty and time are the 2 things you have to solve for. What Angie is talking about is solving for that uncertainty between what you think we should do and when we go talk to people, we do experiments, we figure out what we should do. That notion of having some logic, some cogency about what you think you want to do, and knowing that you can actually get there, probabilistically only, of course, but finding the people who can help you figure out if the thing you think you want to do can actually be done. And you don't have to do experiments to figure that out. That's the unuseful part. There's a whole a framework under that, but let me just say what Angie said is one of the most important things to do. Like, have a co-founder that you can disagree with, and you both have the temperament, and in this case the hat, to facilitate having those really hard conversations, because you're going to be married to that person for 8 to 11 years, and you're going to get kicked in the gut every other day, and it's going to get dark, and you should be able to have that kind of conversation.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the panel so much. I'm just going to say this is the start of the conversation. I know this was a short time, such an important session. I know Bob is always helping folks in the startup ecosystem through Startup Haven. I've been going to Startup Poker, so reach out to Bob. Chic and Angie, I hope you're open to people connecting with you. And Chic has something quick to add as well.
Sorry, Darian, I got to add this. So I started an AI software company last June, and got 3 good developers. We're building the product. You've heard the story about my co-founder. Turns out, by the time I fired him, we didn't have any AI in the product. The product is at
Ouch.
the product's at MVP level in December. Now, he's an experienced guy, but he hasn't done a lot of stuff in 20 years. He stayed in touch with it, don't get me wrong, he's a smart guy. No AI, so now I'm 6 months further to get, the product's gonna launch in a couple weeks, thank goodness. And actually taking these last 6 months to get it there is even better. So, no AI in a AI-infused product, supposedly. And our website talks all about it, but it does have really fast algorithms, which are really cool. It acts like it's AI-oriented, but it's not. But it will be here pretty quick. And by the way, we're moving from Google Firebase over to Azure at Microsoft, and we got accepted into the Microsoft Startups program for all of you entrepreneurs that are familiar with that.
Yeah, great
If you're not
opportunity.
familiar with it, you should look into it.
Thanks, Chic. Yeah, I think misrepresenting your startup and kind of hiding the problems rather than calling attention to them is common. We do this secret sauce. It's secret, but what you're telling investors and customers has to be true at some point. So, let's thank the panel with a round of applause. Thank you so much. Definitely reach out. These are very experienced folks. We really appreciate their time.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I'll add my one aphorism that after you fire somebody, you realize you couldn't have fired them too early, and you couldn't hire a new person, especially a partner, too fast, right? Like or too soon, rather. Too fast, right? Point being, take the time to get to know people who are going to be key employees or co-founders. Take a lot of time to do that. You're going to spend a lot more time with these people than you do with your own family for years. But then when you have something that's not working, a team dynamic that's not working, I look back at 10 startups and all the mistakes I've made with HR, because it's unavoidable. It doesn't matter how many times you've done this, you keep making mistakes with HR. And that's one thing that I always look back, is like, wow, why didn't I get rid of that person a lot sooner? It was never going to work out. Recognize that, but we want to stick our heads in the sand because it's hard, especially when you are also friends with your coworkers. It's really, really hard to fire them. So that hit home for me. All right. Well, we are a little behind schedule because we started late because of the construction and all that stuff. So thank you all for your patience.